Okay, hello chess players. Today I want to go over a game that's being played, got played very recently, got played at the Washington International Tournament. It was Grandmaster Andrew Tang was playing the black pieces. This was against Grandmaster Eshin, I'm terrible at pronouncing names, Magami. I think I'm pronouncing that. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But anyways, there's his name right there. So you can see the guy's name right there. And the critical reason I kind of wanted to go over this game is because, number one, I've known Andrew for a very long time. Andrew grew up in Minnesota. I first met Andrew. He was 9 years old, playing at the Espresso Royale in Dinkytown. So if Andrew's watching this video, thanks for tuning into the channel, Andrew. I do appreciate it. But anyways, like I said, I've known Andrew a very long time. Seen his whole career from childhood all the way up till now. And I did tell him I was going to be following this tournament and I was going to be watching his games. And I was checking out his games and I saw this one and I thought it was very instructive. I thought it was very instructive because it was in a Catalan. And one of the things that I've talked about with Catalan structures before is I've really tried to emphasize in my videos on the Catalan and how to play against the Catalan how important it was to capture this pawn on c4. And I think this video highlights that very well because I feel like White responded in the way that a lot of Catalan players respond, which is they try to just play the Catalan without doing anything in the middle of the board. They just try to play bishop g2, castles, and just do nothing. And they just kind of hope that everything's okay. But really it's not. And I mean, this is the reason why we need to play d captures c4, because we need to at least make White know some theory. We need to put a question to White's understanding of the position, and we need to try to say, hey, you have to do something, because if you don't do something, I'm going to take on c4, I'm going to hold this pawn, and later on, maybe this pawn will become kind of dangerous. So anyways, let's just dive right into the game. So the game continued, White just developed, that much is fine. And then Andrew played c6, so he's making this immediate threat of playing b5 and just holding this pawn on b5. So here's kind of White's last opportunity. He needs to do something right away. Like he needs to play, like, as you can see, like knight e5 or a4. He doesn't do that. He just does what most Catalan players do in positions like this. He just kind of hangs out. And now Andrew says, okay, now I'm holding this pawn. So now what are you going to do? And again, White has this fleeting opportunity to try to break things up right away or put some pressure on the middle right away. Instead, he just kind of makes a nothing move. He plays bishop g5. And you can see, like, when you look at the engine and the engine assesses this, it's already saying that it thinks black has a very, very slight edge. And I think a lot of this is due to the fact, like, even on the GM level, like, if you watch the World Championship match between Magnus Carlson and Ian Nepomniachtchi, Magnus Carlson was continually doing this type of thing with the white pieces against Ian Nepomniachtchi. And, of course, it's Magnus Carlson, so he never really got punished for it. He never lost, because Magnus Carlson just makes very few mistakes. But if you just looked at the assessments in those games, and you looked at places where Nepomniachtchi could have gone better, black was clearly a little bit better in most of those games. So, if anything, we should view this approach to playing the Catalan, just kind of hanging back and letting black consolidate the extra pawn. We should view this as some kind of mistake. And I think this game kind of highlights this really well. Andrew just develops. He plays bishop e7, which is good. And then we see this break in the middle. We see a4 finally trying to break this stuff up, but, it's a little too late. So now we have bishop b7, and everything is held because we didn't have a chance to play a4 plus knight e5 all at the same time, which would have been dangerous. Now it's just a touch late. So he's finally trying to break everything up. But Andrew, very correctly, just captures, and then we have pawn to b4. So now we have a dangerous passed pawn on the b4 square. But more importantly, black has an extra pawn. So black has an extra pawn, and he has a very dangerous passed pawn on b4. So it's not clear how White is supposed to compensate for all of this. So here we have rook d1. You can see the computer kind of wanted to play bishop f6, where black would have had to reply with gf6, but it still says that black should have a slight edge there, mostly just in large part to the passed pawn on b4. So we have rook d1, and then we have knight d7. Black has no problem finishing development. This is a little bit of a question mark here. This bishop could get stuck behind this pawn. So there's a little bit of a danger there, but White has his own development problems. This knight can't develop to, a3 or c3, and also, again, can't emphasize this enough, White is down a pawn, and that pawn is passed. So here we're going to have bishop takes f6, and then simply knight takes f6. No need to play gf6 now that the knight was there. And then we have a5, so he's threatening a6. That's kind of scary. So we need to do something about that. Andrew decides to play rook to c8, I guess with the idea of if a6, we're going to have that a8 square available, and everything should be okay, especially if we follow everything up with c5 at some point. So we have knight to e5, and then we have castles kingside, finishing his development, knight to d2, and then simply queen takes d4, just kind of bravely capturing this pawn on the d4 square because, well, he can. And there's no evidence that he can't. So Andrew goes for it. He doesn't see a reason he can't take it, so he takes it, which is just generally good advice. So knight to c4, queen to c3. We have queen to a4, which was a mistake. It allowed this bishop to escape with bishop a6. Now, once this bishop goes to a6, from a positional perspective, that's really a wrap. Black has got the extra pawn, and now black has no bad pieces. So white's sole compensation for black having this extra pawn was that he could point to that bishop on b7 and say, there's a really good chance that you're never going to get a chance to move that bishop. This is no longer the case. This bishop got out, the bishop got to a6, and now clearly black is better. And, as they say, it should just be a matter of technique at this point, which really it should be. Black has two passed pawns that are connected. There's some weak squares in there, so it's not so simple. But he's got two passed pawns that are connected, and he's got all of his pieces active and on good squares, and he has an extra pawn. He has an active extra pawn. So it really should just be a question of technique, and Andrew just shows pretty good technique here. We have, he gets his queen attacked, he counterattacks, and he starts making progress. So the queen's getting attacked, he's counterattacking on a4, and he's starting to make progress with his pawns up the board. So b3, making additional progress, and then we have this exchange on a2, this capture, and then we just have a simple development move, rook d8. We bring the knight to d5, and then Andrew just continues improving his position. He plays c5, just hanging onto that extra pawn and pushing it up the board. So we have a3, knight b4, and just the technique is just continuing to look very nice. Knight d3, takes. Now he still has the passed pawn. He's got the rook. He's got this active rook. And, there's a little bit of difficulty in converting a position like this. For one thing, there's a little bit of danger. This pawn is very far advanced, so there's always the risk that something bad could happen, like, rook b5, rook b7, rook a7, and then white could try to make a queen or something equally nasty. And then there's the other positional problem, which is this bishop is kind of stuck behind this pawn on c5, so there's sort of a positional problem with the bishop. But that being said, black is up 2 pawns in this position. If you notice, he has a potential passed pawn on the e-file, and then he also has the actual passed pawn on c5. So it's a little inconceivable that white could hold. I guess maybe the other attempt that white can go for is white could try to somehow exchange off all the rooks, and then the opposite color bishop endgame should be a draw. If white manages to activate his king. So white is just still trying for these drawing chances, but Andrew's technique was pretty good. He improves his bishop. He then, sets up so he can set his rook on c7 so that he eliminates the possibility of this rook a7. We see this check. We see the rook go back here, trying to put pressure. He didn't want to exchange those rooks. It wasn't going to help him very much. Then we have this stuff. He's going after the pawn on a6, also pushing this pawn. Just basically finding ways to improve. That's the main thing in positions like this. You just want to find ways to improve. Andrew's still up to 2 pawns. He's still got all of his pieces are on strong squares. Just finding ways to improve. You don't have to calculate these positions to the end. All you need to do is just find ways to improve. And Andrew's doing a good job with all that. We have this attack right here. And over here. Now, at this point, it should basically be over. Like, one of the problems is this rook can't come back to the d8 square, so there's not going to be a retreat in this direction, which is important. And also, all these pawns are on dark squares, so if there's ever an attack on f2, and if bishop takes, then everything falls in a row. And that's actually what happens after bishop d1, rook a1, and just sort of resigns. You don't have rook d8 holding the bishop, and on any king move, you simply have bishop captures f2, and then the king has to take, and then you simply play rook takes d1, and then you're up 3 pawns in a rook and pawn endgame, and it's just essentially game over. But I think this was a very good game by Andrew. I think he played very well with the black pieces, and I think this is one of those games that just kind of highlights something that I've touched on in the past, and I think it highlights it very well, is when you're playing against this Catalan, especially against system players, I mean, even at this very high level, even at this GM level, I think it is really important to take this pawn and then just, put a question to white. Say, hey, are you going to play something like knight e5 or a4 and try to get this pawn back? Are you going to play something highly theoretical? Because if you're not going to play something highly theoretical, I'm just going to hold this pawn and I'm going to keep it, and I'm going to end up beating up a pawn, and I'm going to be able to carry that into an endgame. And that actually does matter. It's not a given that white is just going to be better if he just sits on his position. A lot of people play the Catalan because that's what they think. They think even if black wins the pawn on c4, that this doesn't matter. You can get that pawn back at your leisure. You can get it back any time. That's really not the case. Sometimes black can take that pawn and just keep it. And it is not a given that white is going to be better just because he fianchettoed his bishop. So anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you found it useful. I hope you learned something new about chess. Hope you can use some of these ideas in your own games. Thank you very much for watching.